Hello, this is Chapter 24, The World in Crisis, 1929 to 1945. So, in this chapter, we're going to look at how economic collapse, in the contents of massive global networks and this intensifying ideological competition, brought new crises to the industrial world systems. And we're going to think about the ambiguous role of science in the global search for understanding and meaning, and how it created technology, but also came to undermine its own actual knowledge, and how it made us feel differently about knowledge. The causes, events, and ideological frames and consequences of World War II. Okay, so I'm going to leave this picture of Albert Einstein, a young Albert Einstein, not the iconic picture when his hair is gone white, and think about some of these issues for today. So the global network, as I said, suffered a massive collapse in 1929, and this meltdown both created a very toxic mixture when it was mixed with lingering resentments left over from World War I, and created the conditions for World War II. Our first reading in our primary sources is by Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1932, his first inaugural address. And he was elected in the height of the Great Depression and the economic crisis. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute, but also a period of really simmering social unrest. And at this particular time, there was 25% unemployment. And what Roosevelt did was lay the foundations for the US's modern social safety network. And in doing so, he lessened the threat of radical political unrest or revolution in America. And liberalism and capitalism, these twin pillars of America, were able to eventually work their way through the Depression. In our second reading, is from the opposite end of the political spectrum, Joseph Stalin, the results of the first 5-year plan from 1932, so from the same years. And he's talking about equally dramatic but a more blood-soaked transformation of economy and society in the Soviet Union. Stalin was the party secretary in 1922, and after Lenin's death in 1924, Stalin had the party leadership until he died in 1953. So it's a very important figure for us to understand for this latter half of our course. And his economic policy discouraged individual initiative, collectivized agriculture, and brought this all to bear to support a rapid movement towards an industrial economy. In our third reading, which is Elie Wiesel's Night, which was written in the mid-1950s, Wiesel recounts his memoirs and his experiences during World War II, and he and his family were deported in May of 1944, so quite late on in the war, to Auschwitz. And at Auschwitz, he was separated from his mother and sisters who died there. But he managed to stay for a while with his father. His father was considerably weakened by beatings and starvation and a long forced march during winter. And as a result of all this, his father was sent to the crematorium just a few short weeks before their camp was liberated by the Allies. A lot of people may have read Elie Wiesel's Night in high school. Again, it's one of those must-reads, not a pleasant read, but a must-read. And for this work, he won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1986. And our last two pieces are related to Albert Einstein, and this is why Albert Einstein's been sat there looking at you for a while. And Einstein is a German, a Jew, and he was a physicist, as you should know, hopefully, and he laid the groundwork for the invention of the atomic bomb and nuclear weapons. In 1939, when he feared that the Nazis would develop and use a nuclear weapon first, he urged Roosevelt to fund nuclear weapons program. But in 1945, he signed the second document here, which urged Truman not to use the atomic bomb against Japan because the enemy, Germany, had already been defeated. And so both letters are here for you to read. Okay, so let's just, as usual, take a quick look at our patterns and principles. So when we've looked at major landmarks in human cultural history, we looked at the Axle Age philosophies and Salvation religions. Well, you looked at these very briefly in your introduction because they occur in the first half of this course it goes up to 1500. And the development of modern science certainly stands as a further major landmark in human cultural history. And the other principle and pattern is this, going back to talking about total war. We talked about total war as it related to World War I. It also relates to World War II. And the fluid social sphere of industrial era hierarchies, they're not as rigid, they're not the triangle, they're more circular, people can move around a little bit more, and total war churns up this social sphere much more. Okay, and then I'll just mention here as well the issues in doing world history. So World War II was the first major war to be captured on film. But we have to think carefully about how images captured and projected from film, how they relate to truth and history. Because people choose to shoot certain things and package them in a certain way, and send them out to audiences. So obviously audiences want certain things for certain reasons, and films which are usually shot for purposes of profit are shot and packaged with this in mind. There are other reasons, political reasons, that people may make films as well. So even modern histories that use this footage can distort history, as can fictional history. And Murillo talks in the book about the beginnings of the History Channel, which has now become really quite removed from its original purposes. Ice Truckers is not history. Neither are Ancient Aliens, by the way. But when the History Channel first started and it had footage, and May was making TV for the first time that people would want to watch, it had an overwhelming number of programs about the Nazis because there was a lot of film about them. And so it was sort of all Nazis all the time was really what the History Channel was about. And it was odd, to say the least. It wasn't glorifying them, it wasn't supporting them in any way. It was trying to explain them, but it really was zeroing in on this corner of history because the footage was there for it. So these are things to think about while watching Atomic Cafe. And we can see all sorts of distortion going on in Atomic Cafe, both from what was shot in the first place to how it was repackaged by the filmmakers to send a rather different sort of dark, humorous message that pokes fun at the past, rather than the purposes of the original producers. Okay, so let's think about this this crisis here and what's going on. After World War One, what everybody really wanted was, in the words of President Warren Harding, was to sort of return to normalcy. But this wasn't going to happen. Okay, so you can't turn back the clock. You can't try to rebuild the world of the 19th century. It had gone. There were communist Russia. There were waves and revolts and uprisings in the 1920s as other places toyed with radical solutions and revolutions and anarchy. And fascism appeared in the 1920s with Mussolini. Germany was incredibly unstable. Weimar Germany, the post-war Germany, had to pay massive war reparations to France and Britain. And in order to afford these, they borrowed money from the US. War reparations is, a very sticky subject, and it is obviously one of the contributing factors to World War II. And we talked about German culpability, or particularly the culpability of Kaiser Wilhelm in the last lecture. And you've got to remember at the time that France had, been the battlefield. Basically, it was wrecked by World War I, and Britain's economy had also taken a severe whack due to World War I, and they felt that they deserved reparations. And Clemenceau, the French minister, said, of Germany, we will squeeze them, and we'll squeeze them like an orange, till the pips squeak. But global economy did begin to recover in the post-war period, but then it spectacularly collapsed, starting with the stock market crash which began on October 29th, 1929. This crash was not in itself that unusual. There are financial crises on a regular basis, as we all know from our recent experiences in 2008. But there were several mistakes that compounded this crisis and led to what you're looking at on the screen right now, which is a bread line, and a great photograph of these people queuing up for bread just for something to eat under this poster of the world's highest standard of living. There's no way like the American way. So what did America do wrong to perpetuate this stock market crash into the Great Depression? Well, in the first place, they instituted a tariff. This was obviously a big mistake. So in order to, in their minds, to get Americans to buy American goods, they raised the price on imports. Okay, that doesn't sound too horrible. But what happened is that, what are other countries going to do? If they're not going to accept American exports, if Americans are taxing or raising the prices on non-American goods in America. So other countries retaliate and won't accept American goods or raise the price on those. And so world trade collapsed as a result of this Smoot-Hawley tariff, as it's called, by about 50 to 80%. So this was the first blow. And then the Federal Reserve, instead of increasing the money supply so people could spend more and get the economy moving again, actually restricted money supply. So it's hard to get hold of currency. So people kept hold of it. They weren't going to let it out of their hands, and so they further restricted money supply by the actions of the people. And so this led to deflation and further reduced consumer spending. People weren't spending at all, so prices went down. And the states responded by also not spending very much, and state spending was too small, budgets were too constrained. And then what happened was the power of the global networks spread this contagion. The US was forced to stop giving loans to Germany, and so Germany stopped paying reparations to France and Great Britain, and France and Great Britain could not rebuild after their wartime losses. And things just kind of snowballed from there. So the primary producers were the hardest ones hit. The guys that produce the first round of materials, farmers, miners, loggers, etc. Unemployment, as I said, was very high, 25% in the US, over 30% in Germany. Okay, so we're talking here about real hardship. I mean, that last photograph shows people queuing for bread, and a series of photographs by Dorothea Lange in the 1930s really just show the extent of the Great Depression. You know, if you can look beyond this rather pitiful image of these two small children and their mother, and look at the conditions of their home here, and behind them, this is put together from pieces of tin and cardboard and wood. This is real American poverty. So we have to think about what this does for democracy at this point in time, and it's what it does to democracy which eventually leads us into World War II. So democracy needs to be based on an underlying consensus on frame values, and the crisis such as this tears these apart. And shallowly rooted democracies in Latin America, in Germany, in Japan, all collapse and are replaced by fascist or fascist-leaning regimes. And one of the reasons these fascist-leaning regimes are popular is because they say they'll keep out the communists. So that's one thing that happens. Where democracy does survive are the places where there are actually some kind of safety net, where there are new social programs of state intervention. So extensive protections had been put in place in Britain after World War I, including unemployment insurance, health coverage, state pensions. In Roosevelt's USA, the New Deal was a little more limited, but it was along the same lines. And these are the places where democracy survives. Remember what we said earlier in an earlier election about democracy, free markets, and capitalism being very, very different and separate things, although they're often lumped together in the US as this is our cultural frame, and they're not actually the same thing. They're not synonyms at all. So understanding this, we can start to think a little bit about what's been happening here. Free markets benefited from state socialism, from state spending programs, whether this was on works programs or on unemployment, insurance, etc. Those helped. Whereas nationalist tariffs, like the Smoot-Hawley tariff, which sought to protect interests by taxing imports, those actually harmed the free market. And one thing that the Depression did do was expose the tension between democracy and capitalism. And if you think about what these two things are, there is an inherent disjoint between trying to have a government which is for the say of everyone, and capitalism, which is a situation whereby a very few people at the top are making and enjoying the profits of the labor of people below. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what's going on in communism. Well, this is the image of communism that the Soviets wanted to project. And in some ways, in terms of industry, especially heavy industry, the Soviets' 5-year plans were somewhat successful. And they, promote this idea of worker-friendly policies. Democracy, okay, so people don't normally attach that word, but this is, in some ways, it's also a type of democracy. It's just the way it's organized. So the Soviets also benefited from their isolation from the global network. They kind of removed themselves from the capitalist global economy, and so the Great Depression didn't affect them quite so much. And also, the impressive growth rates of heavy industry in this period are only really so impressive because they have been traditionally so low. So Russia traditionally barely out of the agrarian period. So any growth from that is going to look like a great rate of growth. And so the isolation also hid from the rest of the world what the real costs of this massive industrial development were, and that was the deaths of millions of class enemies. The Soviet Union was not free. It was not a workers' paradise. It was pretty horrific. Okay, so we also see the spread of fascism. And here you're looking at, obviously, a parade of some Hitler youth. So we see some similar things in Germany and Italy and Japan, and that is the capitalists, who are not the same thing as a democracy, remember, that capitalists really had no problem working with non-democratic states as long as they could make profit. And industrial growth was actually spurred on in Germany, Italy, and Japan because these places, as you can probably tell from this picture, also supported militarism. And so there was a lot of government spending on arms and industry related to armament. And this government spending spurred the economies out of depression a little bit more. There were also problems, and I'll let you to read them in the book, with the economies of Germany, Japan, and Italy, and each was a little different. And generally, their economies were recovering due to military spending. Okay, so lastly in this section, I want to talk a little bit about about science. Western science, the idea of scientific inquiry, of repeated experiments, of a knowledge that was open to anyone with a proper training, though really we're talking still largely about wealthy men, had a cross-cultural appeal. And this was unprecedented among other systems of thought. The older systems of thought, the Axel Age thought thinkers, the Salvation religions, we really have to put Western science on top of this as a unprecedented growth in a system of thought. It promised real knowledge rather than abstract certainties that other systems of thought or religion did. But despite this, there were still some inherent problems. Science can usually tell us how, but not necessarily why. And when people are searching for meaning, it's usually why is the question they really want answered. And science itself can lead to a situation where even the idea of surety and scientific knowledge can be undermined. So when we're thinking, for example, about uncertainty, it's really hard sometimes to understand modern science, as this picture will maybe demonstrate. So going back to Einstein, with which we began this segment, and his general theory of relativity, which showed how space-time could be bent by gravity. It's not really as understandable to most people, I think, as classical Newtonian physics. So we get a situation where science, in trying to explain things, becomes more mysterious to the modern man. And if we think about everyday objects, cars and televisions, we really can't explain the physics behind them, or most of us can't. And the atomic bomb, well, that might as well just be magic. Okay, that's the end of part 1.